Hi guys, welcome back to the Mina Does Art Stuff YouTube channel. Today we are starting a new series where I'm going to be testing out a selection of, I guess, student grade / entry level beginner watercolor palettes that aren't, that I think are somewhat good quality, good place to start for beginners, and we're going to compare them with each other and see which one you should be spending your money on, which one is a good one to get. And with the Christmas holiday season coming up, I thought now would be a good time to do this because you guys might be looking to buy presents for people, and if you're looking to buy some paints, maybe a watercolor set for someone who's new to watercolors, or maybe a child who's got a keen interest and see how and you want to encourage that, which watercolor set would be best to get. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about bear in mind I'm based in the UK, so prices and availability may vary depending on where you are in the world. I will list below in the description box of each video a link to where I purchased the palette from, and other sources for that palette as well if it's available in other places, because there's I think there's one palette which I purchased from AliExpress, so if I can find it on another website I'll link it as well, or if I've purchased it from Amazon and I can find it on another website I'll link that as well. So I'll link as many options as I can find, preferably one or two for each one, and I'll also list its current price, or I'll list the price I paid for it and then its current price that it's currently available at. Bear in mind with websites like Amazon, prices fluctuate a lot frequently, so it might be one of those cases where if it's a bit more expensive at the moment, you might want to just keep an eye on that item, like put it in one of your watch lists or something on your Amazon cart, and keep an eye on it and see if the price drops or anything like that. So yeah, so let's get started. The paper I'm going to be using for all of these reviews is going to be this ArtEcho watercolor pad. They call it their expert watercolor pad, but it is cellulose paper. It's not cotton. It's actually not bad for a cellulose paper. It's not my favorite, but it's not terrible. It's cold pressed, 9 by 12 inches, 140 pound, 300 GSM. So it's the kind of paper that I would expect a beginner watercolorist would be using, kind of like I said, a non-cotton paper. And I have the pages all laid out mostly the same. I have a couple of sets. Most of the sets have 24 colors. I have one set that has 21 and two sets that have 36. So some of the pages will look a bit different, but this is mostly how it's laid out. We're going to do just the general swatches of all 24 colors at the top. We will do some color mixing. We'll do a warm color wheel and a cool color wheel. So a red, yellow, blue, and then a magenta, blue, and cyan. Sorry, magenta, cyan, yellow color wheel. I'm going to do some dispersion tests over here, and then we'll do some other sort of color mixing ranges to see what kind of color mixes we can get between different colors. And then at the end, after I've done all of that, I'll go through and talk about some of the pros and cons, my opinions, what I think about it, and value for money, etc. So the first palette we're going to be looking at is this one. It's quite small. I think out of all of them, this is the smallest palette we're going to be looking at. It does have 24 colors. It is by ArtEcho. I purchased this one on Amazon. I actually got this for my daughter, who, bear in mind, is 4. And I got this for her because we were going to go traveling. We went on a couple of holidays over the summer, and I bought this to take because it's smaller and more lightweight and more compact than her other watercolor palettes that she has. I actually think this is better quality than the other one, and it was significantly cheaper as well. It is, I think I only paid like £7 for it, which I wasn't expecting much for £7. Even has like a ring, and it's like a proper solid metal ring on the back there, so that's a pretty decent ring there. You can hold it in your hand if you wanted to, and when you open it up, it came with a swatch card which I filled in for her, and it has this plastic overlay which goes through all the different pigment, all the different colors. The interesting thing about it, and the thing that impressed me, was that it includes all the pigment information as well as light fastness information. Now I don't know how accurate that light fastness information is, and I do plan to do a light fastness test on this set when I next do that. And it also includes opacity information, which I think is really, really interesting. And it's great because it does give you a lot of info there. And it includes like proper pigments that you would see in artist quality paints. So like their ultramarine blue is PV29, the dioxazine purple is PV23, their permanent rose is PV19. So it's like the proper pigments. The only pigments that are hues are things like cerulean or the cadmiums or like the cobalts. Like none of those are like those proper pigments, because those are also very expensive and also toxic. So it's nice to see in this sort of, I guess, aimed at children or younger people palette that doesn't include any toxic pigments. So that's good to know. It does come with a water brush, which has never been used. I don't know, I'm just a fan of using like a proper paintbrush personally. I'm not sure how good the quality is. Like I said, I've never used it, so I'm not gonna comment on the quality of the water brushes that come in these sets. It has a little sponge in the bottom here for you can like dab off your paintbrush on if you want. The immediate downside that I see here is that this is the only mixing area on this palette. I don't know how well you can tell, but this lid doesn't lay flat. So if I hold it sideways, you can see if I try to pull it flat, it just bounces back up. It doesn't lay flat, so you can't even use the lid as a mixing surface, which is, unless you like hold it down with your thumb all the time, which is a bit annoying. I would say the size of the pans are probably slightly smaller than half pans. I'd say they're probably more like a quarter pan size, but it's still like a decent quantity of paint in there. As you can see, this one has been well loved by my daughter and she's used it a fair amount. So, you know, the paint lasts pretty well. And out of all of the sets we're going to be reviewing, this is the only one that's been used as such. Like I said, because I bought it for her for a trip and she did use it. So yeah, let's get to swatching. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to speed up the swatching process, and then at the end I'll come back and we can chat through the colours that are included and the results of the colour mixing and stuff, okay? back now. The paints have all dried and I thought I'd run you through quickly the different colours and pigments that are in this set. So we start with Chinese White PW5, Lemon Yellow PY3, Cadmium Yellow Pale PY3 PY65, Gamboge PY83 PY3, Cadmium Orange PY83 PO43, Cadmium Red Pale PY65 PO43, Cadmium Red Deep PR254 and PR188, Permanent Rose PV19, Dioxazine Violet PV23, Ultramarine Blue PV29, Cerulean Blue PB15:3 PW5, Turquoise PB15:3 and PG7, Phthalo Blue PB15:3, Prussian Blue PB27, Hooker's Green Light PG7 PY139 PB15, Viridian PG7, Phthalo Green PG36, Sap Green PY139 PG36 and PY5, Yellow Ochre PY42, Burnt Sienna PR101 PY42, Burnt Umber PBR7 PY42 PBR11, Van Dyke Brown PBR7 PY42 and PBK11, Payne's Grey PBK7 PB29 PB15 and Lamp Black PBK7. Okay, so as you may have noticed, there's a lot of multi-pigment combinations there. Having said that, I went through and counted. There are 11 single pigment colours in this set. That includes the black and the white. There are 8 double pigments mixes in this set, which is to be expected because well, some of the greens are made up of mixes, and also the quote-unquote cadmium colours are hues, so those are made up of mixes, as well as the cerulean is a hue, so that's a mix as well. And there are 5 triple pigment mixes, and that's basically 2 of the greens and 2 of the browns, and then the Payne's Grey as well are the triple mixes. So that's how that set is. Initial thoughts: I think the colours are pretty vibrant. They dry pretty well. Now this paper probably isn't the best for showing off the vibrancy. The quality of your paper will have an impact on how vibrant your colours show up, but for fairness sake I'm going to use the same paper when testing all the different palettes out so that it's comparable. For the mixing charts, I realised I made a mistake with the yellow in the warm mixing chart. I used the lemon yellow instead of like the cadmium yellow pale or the gamboge, which I intended to use, but it still serves the purpose. It's fine. The yellow doesn't matter too much as long as it's somewhere there. So for the cool color chart, I used lemon yellow, permanent rose and phthalo blue, and you can see it made a nice green, a nice violety purple, and kind of like a more muted corally orange. Then for the warm, I used lemon yellow, cadmium red pale and ultramarine blue, and that's created a muted green, a nice orange and a very sort of brownish purple colour, which is pretty standard, kind of pretty expected. That one's definitely a bit muddier. The dispersion, they disperse pretty well, they move pretty well in the water. That's not really a problem. Some colours more than others, but that's pretty typical. Some pigments travel more in wet washes than others, but in general I would say there's a decent amount of flow. I wouldn't say it's super flowy, but it's not flowy either. Like, it has movement. In terms of the actual colours, like I said, overall I think it's a really nice range. I'm not a huge fan of colours that are mixed with white, so the cerulean blue is a bit iffy, but I understand with a student grade palette you're unlikely to get a true cerulean, so typically what they would do is have some sort of combination of a phthalo blue, which is the PB15 pigment, mixed with a white pigment, so that's pretty standard. I'm also not a huge fan of black and white being in beginner palettes, not because I think you shouldn't use black and white. I just think that it's good to learn about colour mixing, and it's good to learn how to mix your own neutrals. So by not having a black on your palette, you will be kind of, I guess, a bit forced to learn how to mix darker colours. And the reason why I don't think white is necessarily a good idea for beginners. Now don't get me wrong, white has its place when it comes to watercolor painting, and you'll probably hear me say this again in other videos. It has its place. However, I think for beginners, you can be tempted to use white to lighten your colors, whereas in watercolor you should be using water as your white. Water is what you use to lighten your colors, not white. You use white for, like, you'll want an opaque white for something like highlights at the end of a painting, or for mixing pastel shades. So like I said, there is a place for white in watercolor. However, what I see a lot of beginners doing, or especially if you've come from other mediums where you do use white to lighten your colors like acrylics, people get into the habit of using their white watercolor to lighten their colors rather than water, and that can lead to more muddy mixes and muddy colors, which isn't necessarily what you want with watercolors. That's just my opinion. Take it or leave it, do what you want. Like I said, most beginner palettes come with a white. That's just my personal opinion. Like I said, I've actually grown to like using more opaque colors and more like mixing whites and those sorts of colors into my paints with my work, but that's only after I've been like learnt the basics. It's one of those things, it's one of those rules that is there to be broken. There's no hard and fast rules when it comes to watercolors, but I think it's worth learning the basics first and learning them well, and then experiment with other things, rather than relying on something like white to lighten your colors. Learn how to use the water to lighten your colors, etc. All right, I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I've done my spiel. Like I said, it's a personal choice, and that's just my opinion. And then other things with the colors that I would have to note is the neutral colors aren't that great, or the browns aren't great. The burnt sienna, burnt umber, Van Dyke brown are very meh, in my opinion. They're very blur. The burnt sienna is not particularly strong. It was hard to re-wet and get it out of the pan. The burnt umber is also very weak, and the Van Dyke brown as well. They're not particularly dark browns, which you kind of want, a dark brown. The burnt umber and Van Dyke brown are made up of the exact same pigments. Obviously some of the ratios must be a bit different because the colors are ever so slightly different, but again, not a huge fan of those shades. I don't think they're particularly useful, and I'm not a fan of that burnt sienna either. The yellow ochre is quite nice. The sap green I would say is probably more of an olive, and the hooker's green light is more like a slightly bluer version of a sap green. The Prussian blue, I was surprised, was actually a little bit more dull than I was expecting. However, you do get, they call it Viridian, but it's actually phthalo green blue shade, which is PG7. They also include PG36, and they call that phthalo green, but that's phthalo green yellow shade. So there's two versions of phthalo green. There's the blue shade and the yellow shade. So actually having both means you have some really good mixing options there. Otherwise, I don't think there's anything particularly like bad about any of the other colors that are included. Yeah, they're all either pretty standard mixes or not too bad otherwise. There again with the burnt sienna, I don't know why they've added the PY42, which is the yellow ochre pigment, to that, so that's a little bit confusing. And then looking down here at some of these mixes, so what I did was I did one mix for a green and one mix for a purple. So I did gamboge and turquoise colour, and I mixed those. You get a really lovely range of greens. And then for the purple, I did permanent rose and ultramarine blue, which we have here, but I wanted to show the range of those mixes a bit more on paper, like the range you can get between them. There's the green one. I didn't do it for orange because red and yellow make orange, and it's not particularly the most exciting mix to look at the different ranges. It's varying shades of orange. There we go, personal opinion. And then in the middle, I did a mix of the different complementaries to see if we can get some nice neutrals. So first up, we did cadmium. I did cadmium red deep and viridian. So red and green are complementary colors, and you can see here we get some really nice sort of muted purples and sort of grayish purple colors. So that makes a nice, that's a nice mix. Then here we have the French ultramarine and burnt sienna, which is a really classic color combination to mix for a nice gray, but it didn't really create a nice gray. It kind of got like a dull, muted grayish green. It never got to like a proper gray color. So there again, I feel like the burnt sienna was just a bit too weak for that. to work. And then here we have the Dioxazine Purple, and I think it was also Gamboge. And again, it creates some beautiful, like, muted, neutral brown sort of colours. Yellow and purple rarely make a good grey because the yellow is quite a weak colour. So you tend to get more brown tones when you mix yellows and purples, but still good to know that that's a good way to mix a brown, is with yellow and purple. So there's definitely some nicer brownish tones there. Overall, I would say this isn't a bad beginner set, especially if it's for a young child. It's small, it's portable, it's easy for like small hands, which I think is handy. Some of the downsides and some of the negatives, other than the colours and the issues with those that I spoke about, with the palette itself, I also mentioned this at the beginning, there's not a lot of mixing space, so you'll need a separate surface to mix on. You saw I was using a ceramic dish to mix the colours on. The pans themselves are quite small. They're smaller than your standard half pans, so when you're going in with like a brush, and this is a size 8, and I found like even that was still a bit big to fit into this size, so I was like sort of like stabbing it into the wells a little bit. Again, like I said, for children and stuff, this is probably great, or even for yourself if you want like a small inexpensive kit to take with you traveling, or like if you want to go outside and paint, you just don't want to take your nicer paints with you. I think it's actually a really good set. It's really good value for money. I don't think you can beat it for the price. Like I said, I paid about £7 for it. I've seen it on Amazon for as low as £5. Currently, I checked today, it's on Amazon for around $10.99. No idea what it's going to be by the time I post this video, but like I said, the price constantly fluctuates. If you keep an eye on it with sales and stuff coming up, you know, you might find it on sale for a lower price. But even at $10.99, I still think it's really good value for money. You get a lot of paint, 24 colours, pretty good. Other than the fact that these 3 browns aren't particularly good, the rest of the colours more than make up for that. And yeah, I think you could have a lot of fun with this set, and I think it's like I said, a great introductory set for watercolours. I know I paid around £10 for my very first really bad quality watercolour set that I got, and it was really chalky and really hard to use and just didn't work at all, and this would have been a much better purchase for the same amount of money. So that's all I'm going to say there. Yeah, I would wholeheartedly recommend this. Like I said, my daughter loves it, and yeah, that's all I have to say about this one. Let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think about this set? Is it something that you would consider getting for someone in your life, or even for yourself? And yeah, let me know your thoughts. I'll be back with part 2, which we will be looking at the next set of watercolors. There's going to be, I think, 6 or 7 videos in this series, and then I'll do a final video where we will go over and like compare all the different test sheets together, and sort of I'll rank them in terms of which ones I think are the best, and in terms of value for money and quality, and you know, which sets I think are best for which type of artist. So yeah, stay tuned for the next one, and I'll see you in another video very soon. All right, take care. Bye for now.